Hi, I'm Russ Heaps, and welcome to this episode of Beer to Whiskey. In my ongoing mission to spread the gospel of good taste, today I'm in Frankfort, Kentucky. I'm at the Glens Creek Distillery, and you may not have heard of Glens Creek, particularly if you don't live in the Frankfort area, but we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the history of it a little bit, and spoiler alert, Old Crow whiskey comes into it somewhere along the line. Anyway, let's get a little business done to begin with. You'll see on your screen there a little icon, a thumbs up icon. Hey, if you like what you're seeing, click that. That's a like. And if you want to subscribe to the website, or to the channel rather, at the end of the video, it'll say subscribe. There's a little Beer to Whiskey icon. Hit that, and you're all signed up. It's that easy. So now that we have the gratuitous self-promotion out of the way, I'm here with David Meier, and he's the owner. He's sort of the dreamer who's put this distillery together, and I appreciate the invite, Dave.
No problem. Thanks, Russ. Good to be here.
It's been fun so far. I've been here about an hour and a half. I've actually seen one of the tours, and it's a great tour, by the way. So I know there's some deep history here. Why don't you give that to us?
Well, this is the former Old Crow Distillery, I guess we'd have to say, because Jim Beam bought this in 1987, and it was already shut down production-wise, and so they moved production of the Old Crow product over to Claremont, their facility, but they maintained some of the aging warehouses that were part of the Old Crow Distillery. So I tell people I own the Old Crow Distillery building, but they own the Old Crow sign and the name. So
what possessed you to do this?
That's a question I get pretty often, and I don't know if I have a good answer. I've been in manufacturing for about 35 years, and I like making things. I like processes and so forth. And one of the things that's interesting to me about this is there just doesn't seem to be an end with what you can do, what you can learn, different things we can try. So we get to be pretty experimental in what we're doing here.
I think it's against the law to distill at home, but how did you get launched on this? What made you think, that would be fun?
So the answers to that question are no, no, and no. No, it wasn't in my family. No, it hasn't been a lifelong dream. And no, I didn't work at another distillery.
So, would you just get up one morning, wake up one morning, and go, gee, this would be an idea?
It was a little more than that. I guess the short story is a friend of mine said there's this cool old distillery for sale, and cool and old, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Been looking for something that I could do. I do consulting work as a day job, and it's great. I really enjoy it, but I was traveling a lot, and I was trying to think about the future coming up. Retirement. I don't see myself sitting around, so thinking about what am I going to do in later years. So my vision now is I'll be sitting by the still when I'm 80 and just telling stories and having a good time.
This is a pretty good sized property here.
Yes, it is.
Do you have plans to actually expand into all? Right now, we're pretty much sitting in the business end of this place.
This is it for now, yeah. So I've got 16 acres and a number of buildings, including the old distillery there, and there's certainly a lot of potential with that. It was abandoned for about 30 years, and so we've been working to try to clean up the property, trying to get the buildings at least preserved first, and then some, restoration later. Hoping one of your viewers maybe has a few million that they can bring to the table, and we can get busy. Somehow in my original dream, I thought, gee, we'll sell enough bourbon that we can just finance all of that back there.
Right, right.
But it's going to require a few million to get it back in shape.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite a hill to climb.
I think one of the first things I had to do when I bought this place was to realize I don't have to do any of it. Right? I don't have to restore those buildings. I don't have to clean it up. I don't have to take on that massive project. And that's probably the thing that keeps me sane with it. You know, there's enough to do in terms of starting a distillery, getting your processes down. I mean, we build everything here. We do it all. We build all the equipment, all the stills, developed all the processes ourselves, my colleague John and myself. So we've done it all with the help of a few other guys along the way.
And John is your master distiller?
Well, we don't call him master distiller. That's a term of honor, I think, and it's used loosely these days.
Right.
By just about anybody who buys a distillery thinks they can call themselves a master distiller. We're trying to think of the criteria to be a master, you know, and we think you should build your own still, you should create your own recipe, you should be able to distill it, age it, all the way from beginning to end before you can say that. He calls himself the majority distiller because he does it more than me because I have a day job.
Right.
But, you know, technically I'm head distiller or lead distiller, whatever.
What was John's background?
John has an interesting background. He's been self-employed since he was 13, so says I'm the best boss he's ever had because I'm the first boss he's ever had. Long history, had a retail school supply business for several years, and then he did home construction for several years. He's run for Congress, you know, just a lot of varied background, but he's, you know, a lot like me, likes to do things, make things, create things, so it's a good fit. So for any of our viewers at home that might be aspiring to become distillery owners, what was the biggest hurdle that you had? You know, certainly taking on this place is different. It would have been a lot easier to get a property somewhere and build a building and design it for a distillery. The building that we're in here was a bottling building. It wasn't designed for distilling, so we've had to do some things in that regard. So that aside, the fact that we took on this project,
right,
this property, you know, the hurdles really in the terms of bourbon and whiskey in general is you've got to age it. So you've got to have the cash to support that for a period of time while that product is aging. I think a lot of the craft distilleries go and they try to make vodka or gin or some other things to support themselves during that time, but I really didn't want to go down that road. We chose to make a rum because the rum doesn't have to be aged, but we do age ours, and so ended up in the same situation. All the cash outlay up front, waiting for the income to happen later.
So how long have you actually been selling product?
We started sales in 2016. That's a hurdle. The whole distribution and getting the product out in the market is a big challenge. Every state you go into, you have to have, there's different rules, regulations, you have to register in each state, and you have to go through a process and get distributors and so on. So that's a big challenge, I think, for anybody.
I know you're already sort of capitalizing a little bit on the history of this place, yes. As I overheard in the tour that you were giving while I was setting up. Do you actually have plans on trying to restore this to some degree and maybe turn it into a site of some kind? I know we talked earlier that Colonel Taylor, this was his distillery originally, as well as the one that's
the
one that's being renovated up the street. Is there an opportunity, do you think, to really do something historic with these properties?
Yeah, there's a big opportunity at a big cost. You know, at the old Taylor down there, they've spent a really good bit of money, but they're also doing a lot of interesting things in terms of contract distilling for others, restoring the aging warehouses and storing barrels, and that generates some income along the way. You know, if you look at the reality, so Woodford is just up the road about 4 miles this way on the same road. Buffalo Trace is 5-6 miles the other direction. They each attract somewhere around 200,000 visitors a year. So we're certainly in a position at some point to have a much more significant operation. my vision is there's really two opportunities here. I'd like to keep this small and craft, and I'd like to keep this a little more intimate.
Right.
Tours like what you saw.
Right.
That's how we do our tours pretty much every day. We've got a tour going on right now, and you can see that they've been down there for a while, and they're getting into detail about what we do. But there's certainly the history of this place. You can't go past that. I mean, there's significant history here, and an opportunity down there to have a bigger draw, I think.
Sure. Well, I know when I was driving up the road coming here and past the old Taylor distillery down there, and I thought, you know, that isn't even yours yet. I haven't even gotten to yours yet. This is really a great stretch of about a mile and a half or so of some great old bourbon history here. It's pretty amazing.
Well, this was pretty significant. I mean, Colonel E.H. Taylor was pretty well known in the industry. He built these two distilleries as well as Old Granddad in Frankfort and what is now called Buffalo Trace. So he was in part of that, and then 3 other distilleries in other towns. Those 3 are gone. So the 4 that are here remain from what he originally started.
What are you guys distilling right now? I mean, in terms of your products, what all are you making?
Well, we've actually expanded the products that we're making, and those products, now that we do have a little bit of cash flow, those products are in the first initial aging process, so they're not available for sale yet. But we have our 2 original products, the OCD number 5 bourbon, and then our Prohibition Kentucky rum. We can't use the words Old Crow because I don't own the brand.
Right.
That's a Jim Beam brand. But we can say OCD, and that's either obsessive compulsive distillers or maybe it stands for Old Crow Distillery, I don't know. But like I tell people, I own the building, and it has a sign on the front and it says Old Crow, but I don't own the brand.
Right.
And
obviously nobody's complaining about you using number 5.
Not yet. So maybe after this video when we get famous. So the story here is this. You know, a lot of the great ideas that come out here are a collaboration between primarily John and myself, but we have some other guys that come out and help out. And that's really great. And we were talking about yeast one day, and the fact that yeast is in the air everywhere on the planet, and that it can live indefinitely in that state as a spore. And when I mentioned that, John said, well, I wonder if there's any of the Old Crow yeast still here at the distillery. And I said, well, I don't know, but we can try to see.
Right.
So we had some mash, and we took it back to the distillery. I put out 5 different samples, and Critters got in 4 of those samples, but the one we put in fermenter number 5, since it's a closed fermenter, I had to lower it down with a rope into the fermenter. Left it there for a week and came back, and it was fermenting nicely. So we brought that sample up here and grew that culture for about a month until I had enough to make our first batch of that. And so we've been using that yeast exclusively since then. So
that is from the original distillery.
It's a wild yeast, and the thing about it is there's at least 1 million varieties probably of wild yeast on the planet. So it'd be hard to say. I haven't had it analyzed specifically, but the gentleman who used to operate this facility when it was in operation, he stops in and visits us about once a week or so.
Oh, really?
He's retired and he golfs, and so whenever it rains, he stops in. His name is Bob Robinson. And Bob seems to think that based on the characteristics that it likely is the original yeast that was used. So we don't know, can't say for sure.
But it makes a good story.
It is, and it's true, and that's what we did. And we have the yeast in our refrigerators over here. The 3 refrigerators is where we keep the supply, and we have it in a dormant state there, and we refresh that every so often.
Well, let's take a little taste of that.
Yeah, let's try some. This is our signature bourbon now. And I think we don't have a whole lot of rules here in terms of tasting. You don't get all fancy pants about it. We just recommend that people take at least 3 sips, and there's a pretty good reason for that. And this is barrel strength, so this one comes in at 114.6, and so each barrel varies a little bit.
Right.
And it's single barrel, and so the first hit is going to be a little intense, and then by the second sip and third sip, your mouth starts to get acclimated to that, and you kind of understand what you're doing there. So, cheers.
Cheers. Tex Miss Lily.
It's probably going to be a little bit unique.
Yeah, it does have an alcohol hit to it.
And a lot of people you can see them looking up, running through their Rolodex, trying to think about what is it similar to, or what is it, what's familiar, and most of the time they can't really find anything. I've not had anything quite like it. We use a pot still, and we have a process where we have 2 doublers on that pot still, and so those kind of clean up the product and make it a little. But we get a wider flavor profile that way, and clean up the spirit, makes it a little smoother, I think. And then we don't put water in it after distillation, and so this is totally uncut.
Wow.
So the still is designed to put out an average of about 120 proof, and that's what we go in a barrel. Between 115 and 120 is usually what we go in a barrel.
So this is corn in what? Wheat?
This is a rye.
Oh, is it a rye?
Yeah, this is a rye. We've just recently produced a malt whiskey, and we're producing a version we call Cuervito Vivo, which is Spanish for the little crow is alive. So dancing around the words there, but in any case, that's a bourbon that's more along the lines of the recipe that was used here. So
what should I be tasting in this?
Goodness.
It is good. There is plenty of deliciousness there.
We kind of avoid that question of what should you taste, and so what I suggest to people is tell me what you experience in your mouth. In other words, are you getting a little heat? Are you feeling a sweetness? Is there?
Yeah, I'm getting a little heat, and I'm sensing some vanilla. Should I be tasting vanilla?
Yeah, sure. So one of the really interesting part about aging is what happens chemically, and it begins at fermentation. Okay, for instance, you can take acetic acid, which is created by the yeast during fermentation, and when that combines with ethanol, you get ethyl acetate. Ethyl acetate is a sweet, fruity molecule.
Okay.
Okay, and it's often used in artificial flavoring and as a sweetening agent there as well. So when you get some sweetness on here, a lot of that might be ethyl acetate, and so the alcohols which are created during fermentation, ethanol and methanol and propanol, butanol, those alcohols react with other chemicals and create esters, which are flavors. And vanillins is a category of esters.
Okay.
And the vanillins often come from the breakdown of the lignins in the oak. So when ethanol interacts with the oak, it breaks down the lignins, the fibrous substance in the wood, and releases vanillins. So vanilla would be a very typical type of flavor that you would get from a barrel-aged product. So
it was kind of a cheap guess on my part.
It's quite all right. They say that a typical bourbon has somewhere between 150 and 200 individual flavor elements, things that we could detect as a flavor, whether that's almonds or vanilla or cinnamon or whatever, okay? My view is that the challenge there is those 150 things are all mingled together, and so pulling one of those out and saying distinctly, this is such and such.
Right.
Maybe some people can do that.
So I assume since you are distilling bourbon that you've been a bourbon drinker for a while? Absolutely
not.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Before I started this venture, I probably had only tried about 6 bourbons. I can tell you that I never had a rum that wasn't in a mixed drink, and I had never in my life tried a rye whiskey.
Amazing.
So yeah.
So this was way out of your wheelhouse.
Way out of the wheelhouse. Other than making things, what I do is make things. That's something I'm able to do. So, like I said, we build the equipment, we built the stills, and I think that was a benefit, because instead of buying a still and having somebody come in and tell me how to set it up and how to make a recipe and how to cook it and doing all that, we had to learn.
Yeah.
We had to go through the trials and tribulations, and we had to learn how to scale it up, or how to do certain things. And John, some of the other guys that help out here, Doug, he's also a hands-on kind of guy, and some of the other folks that we've had, it just seems to be the kind of thing we do. We're able to do that, and maybe we get lucky. I don't know. I tell people I don't really see distillation as being that complicated as a process. We use a pot still. People have been doing that for a few thousand years.
Right.
We're not using the new high-tech commercial stills.
So you're doing things kind of the old-fashioned way.
The very old-fashioned way. So that's the way we take a look at it and say, you know what? Let nature do what nature does. Let the process do what the process is going to do. We believe if we think it tastes good, other people will think it tastes good. If it's not good, we won't put it in a bottle. So it's pretty simple that way. We believe that if people come here and they have a good experience, that the word will get out eventually.
So what's the difference between your OCD 5 and your stave and barrel that you also
Well, the stave and barrel is one that we source. So we buy this from MGP in Indiana, and they produce a lot of good product for a lot of brands that we know on the market. So we buy that in a barrel and we age it here, and then we bottle it here. And it's the same thing with our rye that comes out of MGP. So this rye is also in a lot of products that are on the market.
Okay.
We don't cut it, and we do single barrel. So I think that's what differentiates it. Would you like to try a little bit?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not?
See how I got that to happen.
Yeah. It was easy. Right? I was going to let you try some rum too. So.
Well, yeah, I'd like to try a little bit of that.
We don't mind. We can try anything we like here, and so this one, I tell people that it is a little more traditional. It's made in a continuous still, which makes it the flavor profile a little more traditional flavor profile. It's 21% rye, so it's got a little bit higher rye content than our OCD.
I think because of the way you age that bourbon that you're sort of buying from somebody else, do you think that's making any kind of a difference?
I do, and I don't know that I can explain all of the variables that make the difference. But you're absolutely right. What I do know is, and we have a couple of old aging warehouses here from the Old Crow, is that in the hot Kentucky summers, they might be 130 degrees on the top floor, and if you walk by that building in the summertime, cool air comes out the ground floor because a part of it's subterranean, right, dug into the hillside. So what we know here, and what I think everybody knows, is that below a certain temperature, really much below 60, and aging process slows down considerably, but below 40 it pretty much stops.
Yeah.
So in the wintertime, not much is happening. This building is not heated in the wintertime, and it's not cooled in the summertime. So if we put up a product, say in December, and pull a sample out 6 months later, very little has happened in the barrel.
Yeah.
But then if we pull it out 6 months after that, a lot's happened in the barrel. So that heat cycle in the summer is critical. Some of the distilleries say that it's seasonal, but it's actually a daily heat cycle that's happening there. And so below 40 degrees, you're just not getting enough variation to cause the pressure inside the barrel to push that alcohol in and out of the wood.
So I may be getting too deep in the weeds, and,
No, go ahead.
And if I am, well, it's just...
You can edit later.
Yeah, I guess. But the whole is the daily cycle enough to get liquid into the wood and back out of the wood?
Yes.
I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, for example, we on the floor here, we have the barrels that most likely we barreled recently during the winter. And a few weeks ago, it heated up to about 70 degrees, and a bunch of them started to leak.
Oh, really?
So there's enough pressure in there at that point
Yeah.
to cause that barrel to leak a little bit. One of the things that we get asked a lot, is how old is this? And what we try to tell people is that age is pretty much irrelevant because of that. If I put a barrel on the top of that aging warehouse, it's going to do in 2 years what one on the bottom floor is doing 4 or 6.
Right.
And so depending on where that barrel has spent its life, it's going to be quite different overall. And so since all of ours are here, we don't get that much temperature variation within that small space.
Sure.
And the other thing is, since we don't do hundreds of barrels every day, unfortunately in the racks over here, my oldest barrels are in the back, so when I get ready to bottle that one, I have to move all the barrels out. So they get rotated
Right.
by default.
Right.
Whereas, in other places they would put hundreds of barrels away, and then they would pull hundreds of barrels out, and they were all made on the same day.
Right. Right.
So ours are not made on the same day, and so we have to move them around.
So let's talk rum.
So with our rum, and here you'll have to try some.
Oh man, I couldn't possibly.
What kind of job is this?
I know, isn't it great?
People think I sit around and drink all day, but I actually don't. This is unusual, but we'll make an exception. The thing about rum is this. Now, I may get into the weeds a little bit. So rum versus bourbon is a more wide open category. So bourbon has to be made in the United States. Rum can be made anywhere in the world. And because of that, you get a lot of different types of rum
Right.
based on the region and based on the raw material that went into making it and so on. So whereas whiskey has to be 100% grain, rum has to be made from sugar cane products. Okay?
Which is a pretty wide open.
Which is pretty wide open because you have cane juice, which is what the Brazilians use to make cachaça. Or you have evaporated cane juice, you have molasses, and you have various grades of molasses, and then you have sugar and various grades of sugar. And so as the base material makes a big difference in terms of what the final flavor profile is going to be. So a lot of rum, because of economics, is made from a byproduct of sugar production, which is blackstrap molasses. But you take the cane and you grind it and squeeze it and get the juice out of it, and then they boil that to boil off the water and to concentrate it.
Okay.
And you get molasses, which is syrup-like. And then the sugar crystals form, and so they are able to take the sugar crystals off of that. And so the more they continue to boil that molasses, the less sugar it has, and also the taste gets more concentrated and not necessarily pleasant. The molasses we use is a first grade, the first cut molasses, very sweet, flavorful. I just want to jump in the tote and swim around in it. It tastes so good. I mean, stick our fingers in there and it's delightfully tasty. And so the way we distill with our bourbon and the rum is we preserve that flavor. So because a lot of rum is made from blackstrap molasses, it has to be distilled to a very high proof to get rid of that base flavor, which is the same thing with vodka originally from potatoes. If you've ever smelled a rotten potato, that's what fermented potato smells like, and it's really bad. So in order to get rid of that, you have to distill it up to 190 proof. So by law, rum can be distilled up to 190 proof, and much of the rum from the South where it's a byproduct. So you can take the byproduct of sugar production that blackstrap still has 20% or so sugar,
Right.
and ferment that, but then you have to distill it to a very high proof to get rid of that bad flavor. So a lot of rum starts at 190, 189 proof, and then it gets cut back. So it's flavorless. It's essentially like a vodka, okay? So we don't distill it above 120. So again, we're preserving that flavor that comes through in that molasses. We pay a lot more for the molasses, but we're preserving those flavors. So that's the big difference.
So what's the proof of this?
This one is 112. So if you smell that on the nose, that's the hints of the molasses. What I pick up on that is very reminiscent of what the molasses brings to the flavor. So, and you might say, oh, it sort of resembles bourbon. Well, we did age it in a used bourbon barrel, and so you're going to get those woody, similar flavors that you get from a bourbon.
I'd probably plop an ice cube in this, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, we actually like it with orange juice. It's quite tasty. We call that a rumosa.
Well, all good things must come to an end. Plus, your tour is moseying back over this way, waiting for their shot at this stuff. So, I appreciate your time and spending a little time with us. And thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And with that, see you next time.
Cheers.